In the heart of Mugoma, a quiet village nestled between the rolling hills and thick acacia forests of East Africa, the people lived in rhythm with the spirits of the land. The rustling of leaves was never just wind. The sudden silence of birds often carried a warning. Dreams were not merely dreams, they were messages, whispers from those who walked before. From the ancestral realm that existed just beyond the veil of waking life. For generations, the people of Mugoma had upheld their ancient traditions. They believed that no soul ever truly vanished. The departed watched from the shadows of the baobab trees, danced in the fires of ritual nights, and whispered truths into the minds of those willing to listen. Among the villagers lived Nyasha. A widowed mother of 3, known for her strength, humility, and unshakable faith in the guidance of the ancestors. Life had not been easy since her husband died of a sudden fever 2 years ago. But she carried on, working in the cassava fields, raising her children, and keeping her father's altar flame lit every night. But everything changed on a quiet afternoon during the harmattan season. Her youngest child, Tendo, a lively 7-year-old boy with eyes like storm clouds, disappeared into the forest chasing a red butterfly. One minute he was there, barefoot and laughing, the next. Only silence. The entire village joined the search. The forest was combed, rivers scoured, hills climbed. Days passed. No trace. Panic gave way to despair. Then came the dream. On the 3rd night of Tendo's disappearance, as the wind howled through the village and Nyasha wept alone by her hearth, her late grandfather, Mzee Juma, the revered elder who had died 10 years prior, appeared at the foot of her bed. He was dressed in the white cloth of the ancestral realm, his eyes burning like embers. He spoke only one sentence. Follow the red path beneath the roots. The child sleeps where the forest weeps. Then he vanished. What did it mean? Could it be trusted? To those unfamiliar with the ways of the spirits, it would seem like a cruel trick of grief. But Nyasha knew better. In this land, ancestors did not lie. Thus began a journey of faith, fear, and spirit-led discovery. As Nyasha followed the whispers of the dead to bring her child home, what unfolded was not merely a search, it was a revelation of the sacred ties between the living and the departed. And the unseen power that protects those who still believe. The sun hung lazily in the afternoon sky, casting long golden rays across the village of Mugoma. The air was thick with dust kicked up by the harmattan winds, and the scent of roasted maize drifted from open fires where women cooked and gossiped under the shade of ancient trees. Children's laughter echoed across the narrow footpaths, and the occasional sound of pounding cassava marked the rhythm of the day. Nyasha sat on a wooden stool outside her thatched hut, weaving a basket from dry palm fronds, her fingers working on instinct while her ears tuned to the voices of her children playing nearby. Tendo, the youngest, was chasing a red butterfly through the edge of the bush just beyond the clearing. His giggles rang out like music, light and careless. His older sisters, Wama and Lulu, were farther off, drawing patterns in the dust and arguing about who would fetch water from the well. Don't go too far, Tendo, Nyasha called, not looking up. I won't, Mama, he shouted back. Then giggled as he darted behind a bush. The sun dipped lower. Shadows lengthened. Nyasha finished the final loop of the basket, glanced toward the forest line, and frowned. Silence. She rose slowly, her eyes scanning the tree line. Tendo, she called. No answer. She took a few cautious steps toward the trees. Tendo, she called again, louder this time. Nothing. Her heart gave a quiet thud. She hurried past the bush where he had last been, looking for signs of his little footprints, the bright red scarf he always wore, anything. There was nothing but dry leaves, silence, and the distant call of a hornbill. Fear, sudden and sharp, struck her chest. Wama and Lulu noticed their mother's alarm and came running. Mama? What is it? Tendo is not here, Nyasha said. He was just playing here. Did he pass you? No, we didn't see him. Nyasha's voice tightened. Go fetch the neighbors. Tell them I need help. Within minutes, the village responded as one. In Mugoma, no child ever went missing without the entire community rising to act. Drums were beaten to summon elders. Men gathered with machetes and lanterns. Women brought water and cloth. The children were kept indoors. Night was falling fast. Search parties moved into the forest in lines, calling Tendo's name again and again. They lit torches, climbed trees, searched burrows and riverbanks. Dogs were brought to sniff for his scent. The old hunters guided the way, whispering to the spirits of the bush for protection. But the forest remained silent. By dawn, they returned empty-handed. Not a footprint, not a scrap of cloth. Not a broken twig that could be traced to the boy. It was as if the earth had swallowed him whole. Nyasha did not sleep. She sat by the fire, her knees pulled to her chest, her eyes hollow. Her hands trembled as she clutched the small wooden carving her father had once blessed, an amulet shaped like a bird. Her neighbors brought her food and comfort, but she could neither eat nor speak. I should have gone with him, she murmured to no one. He was just there. I turned for a moment. The second day brought more searching. Word spread to nearby villages. Rituals were performed at the edge of the forest, offerings of honey and palm wine placed beneath the irako trees. The local diviner, Baba Nguvu, was summoned. He threw bones on a mat and closed his eyes, chanting softly, waiting for the ancestors to speak. But they were silent. His spirit is not gone, Baba Nguvu finally said. He is not in the world of the dead. But something blocks the path of vision. What does that mean? Nyasha asked. It means he is hidden. By something old. Something sacred. Or something angry. The air in the hut grew cold. That night, the village was quiet. The drums had stopped. The fire burned low. Nyasha lay curled on a mat in her hut, her daughters asleep beside her. She did not cry anymore, her tears had dried with the sunrise. She stared at the roof, listening to the wind whistle through the cracks. And then, she drifted into a dream. It was not a normal dream. The fire in her hut was still burning, but the room was filled with a strange silver mist. She sat up and saw that she was no longer in her hut. She stood in a wide clearing, the moon above so bright it turned the grass to glass. Across the clearing stood a man. Tall, proud, wrapped in white cloth from shoulder to ankle. His skin the color of carved ebony, his head adorned with feathers and beads. Nyasha gasped. Mzee Juma, she whispered. Her grandfather smiled gently. His eyes glowed, not with fire, but with something older, wiser. You are strong, child, he said. But even strength needs guidance. Where is Tendo? She asked, stepping toward him. He sleeps where the forest weeps. He replied. You must find the red path beneath the roots. I don't understand. Please, tell me more. But he was already fading, his voice like wind in dry leaves. Remember who you are. And remember whose blood sings in your veins. Then silence. Nyasha awoke with a jolt, breathless, heart pounding. The fire was low, the night quiet. But the words were still in her mind. Red path beneath the roots. Where the forest weeps. It made no sense, and yet it made perfect sense. She dressed quickly, wrapped a cloth around her shoulders. And stepped out into the chill of the early morning. She needed answers. Not from the living, but from the dead. If the ancestors were speaking, then she would listen. And she would find her son. Even if she had to walk into the arms of the spirits themselves. The morning air clung cold and heavy to Nyasha's skin as she walked briskly through the still sleeping village. Her bare feet made soft sounds on the earth, and the stars above had not yet surrendered to the dawn. In one hand, she carried a calabash of millet beer, in the other a small pouch of kola nuts, offerings not for men, but for the spirits. Her destination lay beyond the northern ridge, at the edge of the forest where the roots of old things slept. There, in a hut draped in animal hides and lined with bones, lived Baba Nguvu, the village diviner. Few dared disturb him before the sun rose, but Nyasha was a mother. And grief gave her the right to defy the customs of time. She approached the hut slowly, kneeling before the carved totem post that marked the entrance. She bowed low, pressing her forehead to the earth 3 times, and whispered a prayer, "Let the gate of sight be opened. Let the voice of the Old One speak." Inside, a soft cough answered her, followed by the creak of old joints rising. The curtain parted. "Nyasha," came the deep, sandpaper voice of Baba Nguvu. "The winds carried your sorrow to me before your feet reached my door." She stood, face tight with emotion. "I saw my grandfather in a dream last night." The old man's eyes sharpened beneath thick, white brows. "Mzee Juma?" She nodded. "He told me to follow a red path beneath the roots. He said my son sleeps where the forest weeps." Baba Nguvu's expression darkened. He stepped aside and motioned for her to enter. The inside of his hut smelled of ash, herbs, and time itself. Bones of animals hung from the ceiling, rattling gently as if responding to the disturbance her presence brought. In the center lay a mat woven from river reeds, surrounded by 4 small fires burning in clay bowls. He gestured for her to sit. "The ancestors speak in riddles," he said. "To understand them, one must know the flame they came from." He reached into a clay pot and withdrew a handful of bones, shells, and beads. With slow deliberation, he blew on them, murmuring in a language older than the village itself. Then he cast them across the mat. The bones landed with soft thuds, and immediately, the air in the hut shifted. One of the fires flickered blue. A chill ran through Nyasha's spine. Baba Nguvu leaned forward, studying the pattern with furrowed brows. His eyes darted from one symbol to the next, then he stopped, his face hardening. "There is something ancient at work," he said slowly. "Your son has crossed into a place of memory, where the forest holds old grief. It is not death that claims him, but sorrow, buried deep in the land, older than this village." Nyasha's fingers clutched the amulet at her neck. "Can I reach him?" The old man looked at her, long and steady. "Yes. But you must walk a path no mother should ever tread alone. The red path beneath the roots, I know it." He turned and retrieved a bowl of ochre clay mixed with herbs. Dipping 2 fingers in it, he drew a symbol on her forehead, an eye within a spiral. Protection for the unseen. "There is a grove," he continued, "north of the river bend. Few speak of it. It is a place where an old god once wept. A long time ago, a child was taken there, just like yours, lost to time and spirit. The land remembers, and it mourns still." Nyasha's voice trembled. "Why would my son go there?" "Not all who walk are led by their own feet," Baba Nguvu said. "Some are drawn by echoes. And some," he paused, eyes narrowing, "some are chosen." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "You must go alone. Bring no torch, no blade. Only your faith. Speak to the land as if you speak to your ancestors. And when the path turns red, do not run." Nyasha swallowed her fear and nodded. "When should I go?" "Tonight. When the moon is high and the winds are still. Leave food at the threshold of your home, and tell your daughters not to follow. If you have anything of tendos, a cloth, a toy, bring it. The spirits need a scent to remember." Nyasha stood, her limbs trembling but her heart steady. She bowed again. "Thank you, Baba." As she left the hut, the first light of morning broke across the sky, brushing the trees with gold. But even in the growing warmth of day, the shadow of what she had heard clung to her. Back at her home, she gathered Tendo's little red scarf, the one he wore the day he vanished. She tied it around her waist like a sacred belt, close to her womb, where he had once lived before life took him into her arms. She prepared her home as instructed, cooking sweet porridge, slicing ripe mangoes, and laying them outside the door. She kissed her daughters and whispered lies to keep them safe. "I'm going to find your brother," she said. "But I need you to stay here. Trust the ancestors. Keep the fire burning." Wama, the older one, wanted to protest. Her lips trembled. "Mama, what if you don't come back?" "I will," Nyasha said firmly. "Because no spirit will stop a mother who walks with the voices of the dead." As dusk fell, she wrapped herself in white cloth, placed beads around her wrists, and took one final look at the village. The drum at the center of town beat once, a low, distant sound. More felt than heard. She walked through the cassava fields, past the empty riverbed, into the trees where the light died early. As the moon climbed above, silver and sharp, she found the bend in the river. There, just as Baba Nguvu said, was the forgotten path, a trail of dry red soil, twisting beneath roots that had grown over it like fingers of a buried giant. It was not a path made for feet. It was a wound in the earth. She stepped forward. The trees above groaned, and the air thickened. Far ahead, a soft sound drifted on the wind. A voice, not quite human, not quite wind, whispering her name. She did not turn back. The forest closed around Nyasha like a mouth swallowing breath. Every step she took deeper into the red path was muffled by the hush of ancient trees and the clutching hands of low branches. The moon above was a pale disk, offering little light beneath the thick canopy. Her bare feet sank into the red earth, warm and soft as ash. And her breath mingled with the mist that now drifted low over the path like a memory refusing to be forgotten. There was no birdsong here, no insect hum, only silence, thick and pressing, as though the trees themselves held their breath. She walked without pause, guided by the rhythm of her heartbeat and the memory of her grandfather's voice echoing in her skull. Where the forest weeps. The scarf tied at her waist fluttered slightly with each step, as if sensing something ahead. She held it gently, pressing the fabric against her fingers like prayer beads, whispering Tendo's name under her breath with every few strides. "Tendo, my child, my son. I am coming." The deeper she moved, the stranger the forest became. Vines twisted into shapes resembling hands. Bark peeled back in strips that looked like skin. Mushrooms glowed faintly blue at the roots of trees, casting a ghostly hue over the ground. Time seemed to warp. Sometimes the path narrowed to a tunnel of branches, other times it opened into wide clearings with no sky, only darkness above. Her ears caught fragments of sounds that vanished when she turned, laughter, weeping, the rustle of small feet. Then, she came to a tree that stopped her heart. It was massive. Its trunk as wide as a hut, and its roots spread like the arms of a drowning giant. At its base, water seeped from the earth, forming a shallow pool, clear, unmoving, and ringed by fallen leaves that had not decayed. From the bark of the tree, slow tears of sap rolled down like blood from ancient wounds. The forest was weeping. This was the place. Nyasha dropped to her knees, her breath catching in her throat. "Spirits," she whispered, bowing low, "I am Nyasha, daughter of Mwenzi, granddaughter of Juma. I come not in pride, but in pain. I seek my son, who walks where he should not walk. I ask your guidance. I offer my voice." She opened the pouch at her side and scattered the kola nuts around the base of the tree. Then, from her other hand, she took a carved wooden flute, Tendo's favorite toy, gifted by her late husband. She placed it on the earth. The moment the flute touched the soil, the forest exhaled. A long, slow breeze passed through the trees, rustling the leaves not above her, but behind her, as if something had just moved. She didn't turn around. Instead, she closed her eyes and listened. There, soft as breath, came a sound, a child humming. Her eyes flew open. Across the pool, under the roots of the great tree, a hollow had opened, a space like a tunnel. Just large enough for a small body. And within the shadows of that space, something moved. "Tendo," she whispered. A shape emerged slowly. At first, it was only eyes, round and wide, catching the moonlight. Then a thin arm. A tangle of curly hair. A scarf, his scarf, the other end of the one she wore. Her heart leapt. "Tendo." The boy crawled forward cautiously, as if waking from a long, strange dream. His skin was pale, as if he'd been hidden from the sun for days. But his eyes were alert. He looked at her as though he recognized her, yet could not quite believe she was real. "Mama," he said, voice dry and cracking. She rushed forward, scooping him into her arms, clutching him so tightly she feared she might break him. "Yes. Yes. My son. Oh, ancestors be praised, you're alive." He clung to her, trembling. "I was lost," he said. "I was walking, then I saw a woman. She was sad. She was crying. She told me to follow her. And then I was here." Nyasha stiffened. "A woman?" He nodded. "She had no eyes. Just light where her eyes should be. She said I reminded her of her son. She sang me a song and said someone would come for me." Nyasha looked toward the weeping tree, and in the bark, she now saw it, the faint image of a face. A woman's face. Carved not by hand but by time, sadness etched in every line. The grief of generations bound into the wood. An old spirit. A mother who had lost her child long ago, and now kept the child of another, not out of malice, but out of memory. A forest that remembers. Nyasha bowed deeply to the tree. "Thank you," she whispered. "You held him when I could not. You mourned for him as I did. And now, you let him go." Tendo clung to her neck. "I want to go home." She stood, his body small but warm against hers. The path behind them now glowed faintly, marked with scattered petals and small white stones that had not been there before. She followed it. And this time, the forest made no sound. No strange voices. No moving shadows. Just silence. Respectful. Peaceful. By the time they reached the river bend, the first light of dawn had painted the eastern sky. The birds began to sing again. A monkey chattered in the distance. Life returned. When they reached the edge of the village, a scream pierced the morning stillness. It was Wama. She came running from the hut, bare feet pounding the earth, tears streaming from her face. "Mama! Tendo!" The villagers came soon after, staring in stunned silence as the boy they had believed dead was carried home by the woman who had walked into the heart of the forest and returned. Some wept. Others knelt. Baba Nguvu, watching from afar, only nodded, as if to say, the ancestors remember their own. Later that day, a ritual was held, not of mourning, but of thanksgiving. Offerings were made at the old shrine. Drums were played, and Nyasha stood with her children beside her, holding the red scarf in her hands like a sacred relic. That night, as the fire crackled and the stars shone above, she dreamed again. Her grandfather was there, seated beneath a tree with the eyeless woman beside him. They did not speak. They simply looked at her, then at Tendo, then vanished into the mist. And the wind whispered. Blood remembers. Grief binds. But love leads home. For days after Tendo's return, the village of Mugoma lived in quiet awe. The child who had vanished without a trace and the mother who had dared to enter the forest alone became the heartbeat of every whispered conversation, every hushed prayer. Elders spoke of it as a sign, a reminder that the world of the living and the world of the spirits were not separate planes, but one land with two skies. Yet amid the celebration, Nyasha felt a shift within herself that no song or dance could soothe. Something had changed in her. The moment she stepped onto the red path and into the place where memory had weight and time bent like reeds in the river, she had crossed a threshold that few ever return from unchanged. It was not just about finding her son. It was about the voice she had heard in the wind, the shape of the sorrow carved into bark. The silence of a mother long dead who still grieved through roots and earth. Tendo had no memory of time. To him, it was as if he had only napped for an afternoon. He spoke often of the woman with light in her eyes, of songs he heard in the dirt, and of dreams that still lingered. Nyasha let him talk, but never asked too much. She sensed that some things were meant to stay half-known. She returned to Baba Nguvu's hut after the third day, alone once more. This time, she did not kneel before entering. She stepped inside. Head high, as one who had earned her place among the seen and the unseen. Baba Nguvu sat on his mat, eyes closed, humming a low song that made the bones on the ceiling sway as if stirred by breath. He opened his eyes as she entered and nodded slowly. "You carry the scent of the old ones now," he said. "The wind follows your feet." "I didn't ask for this," Nyasha replied. "I only wanted my son." "And you found more than that," the old man said. "You touched a place most fear. You stood in the wound of the world and were not torn apart. Do you think the spirits will forget that?" She was silent. Then she said, "The woman who kept him, who was she?" Baba Nguvu's eyes darkened like storm clouds. "She was once called Ogwi, a mother from before this land was called Mugoma. Her child drowned in the river during the season of the Great Famine. She begged the gods to return him. When they refused, she went into the forest and never came out. It is said that she gave her soul to the land so she could stay near the place where his spirit had passed. The forest took her grief and shaped it into memory. That weeping tree. That is her grave. That is her body." Nyasha shivered. "She never meant harm," Baba Nguvu continued. "But her sorrow was strong. It called to any child who wandered near. She fed them memory, cradled them in her ache. Until one came who reminded her of her own. That was Tendo. She was a mother," Nyasha whispered, "just like me." Baba Nguvu nodded. "And now, her story is finished. She has passed on. Because you came, not with fire, but with love. You didn't fight the forest. You spoke to it." Nyasha lowered her eyes. "I don't feel powerful. I feel hollow." "That is how all spirit walkers begin," Baba said gently. "But that emptiness is space for something greater. The ancestors have seen you. They remember you. And they may call you again." "I don't want to be a spirit walker," she said. He chuckled. "None of us ever do." In the weeks that followed, Nyasha returned to her quiet routines, harvesting cassava, cooking over the open fire, telling stories to her daughters at dusk. But now, the villagers came to her with different eyes. Not out of pity, but out of reverence. Women brought her gifts, herbs, fabric, small tokens of gratitude. Men bowed slightly when she passed. Children stared at her in awe and whispered behind their hands, "That's the mother who walked with spirits." They asked her to tell the story. At first, she refused. She said it was a private thing, a sacred journey between her, her son, and the ancestors. But one evening, when the moon was high and the stars burned bright, she sat before the village fire and spoke. She told them not only of Tendo's disappearance and her dream, but of the weeping tree, of Ogwi. Of the cold path lit by memory and grief. She spoke not as a storyteller, but as a witness. And when she finished, there was no applause, only silence and the slow, steady beating of a drum in the distance, as if the earth itself acknowledged her words. That night, she dreamed again. This time, she stood not in the forest, but on a hill above the village. The wind was still. Before her stood Mugoma, her grandfather, smiling in the way he used to when she was a child sneaking food before dinner. "You have walked where few dare tread," he said. "But remember, child, the work of spirit does not end with one journey. You are now a vessel. Others will come." She woke with a strange warmth in her chest. And they did come. A woman whose son had fallen ill with no cure. A man plagued by nightmares of a brother long dead. A child who spoke to shadows and did not sleep. They came to Nyasha, not because she was a healer or a diviner, but because she had walked into the silence and returned with truth. She did not pretend to have answers. But she listened. And sometimes, when she sat by the fire and closed her eyes, she heard whispers on the wind. And sometimes, they told her what to say. She became known not only as the mother who found her child, but as she who hears. The woman whose heart beat in time with the ancestors. And Tendo grew, strong and quiet, never quite the same as before. He no longer chased butterflies. He sat by trees and hummed to himself. Sometimes staring into the forest for hours. He never feared it, but he never entered it again. One day, when he was older, he asked, "Mama, do you think she's still there, the woman from the roots?" Nyasha looked toward the hills, where the trees rustled in the breeze. "No, my son," she said. "I think she found what she was waiting for. She let go. And will the forest ever call again?" She smiled, touched his cheek, and whispered, "If it does, we will listen." That night, as stars painted the sky and fires burned low across Mugoma, a soft wind drifted down from the hills. It brushed across the rooftops, wound through the cassava fields, and whispered through the tall grasses by the riverbank. And if one listened closely, with heart open and soul still, it carried the faintest of voices. A lullaby. A farewell. A promise. Years passed in Mugoma, as they always did, quiet and sure, like the turning of the seasons or the slow, measured steps of an old song. The land healed, as did the hearts of those who had lived through the night Tendo disappeared. Children born after the event heard the story in whispers around the hearth. They listened wide-eyed, not knowing whether it was myth or memory, legend or living truth. But they all knew the name. Nyasha, the woman who walked into the weeping forest and returned with her child. Her story was no longer just hers. It had become part of the village's soul, part of the air itself. Nyasha herself had grown quieter with time. She no longer sought answers from the ancestors, yet they continued to speak to her in dreams and subtle signs. She had learned to live not in fear or awe of the spirit world, but in harmony with it. She no longer resisted the feeling that she was being watched when alone in the fields, or the sudden chills that crept through her bones during certain sunsets. These, she now knew, were not warnings, but reminders. The spirits did not forget. And neither did she. Tendo, too, had changed. From the quiet boy who returned from the roots of the weeping tree, he became a young man of calm eyes and few words. He listened more than he spoke. He carved small wooden figures and left them near trees, saying nothing of why or for whom. He walked barefoot in the mornings and often stood facing the forest at dusk, his hands behind his back. His expression unreadable. Though he never again crossed the river bend, he seemed bound to the forest in some invisible way, as though part of him had been shaped by its silence and sorrow. One day, an elder died. Mzee Kato, the village's longest living hunter. passed away beneath the shade of the same baobab where he had once taught generations to track gazelle and read the language of bird calls. As was custom, his family began preparations for the burial. And Nyasha was asked to lead the ritual of calling. She was no priestess, yet everyone knew that her voice reached across veils. When she spoke, the dead listened. That evening, Nyasha sat before the shrine with a bowl of white chalk and tendo by her side. As the village gathered, she lit a fire and sang the calling song, the one passed down from grandmothers long gone. She called Mzikado's name 3 times, each time louder, until the wind stirred and the fire flared. Then she poured water into the red earth and spoke to the ancestors, "He is coming to you. Receive him. Remember his name." Suddenly, in the quiet after the prayer, a gust of wind burst from the west and sent the flames leaping. The villagers gasped. Tendo did not flinch. He was staring at the fire with calm eyes, and as the wind settled, he leaned toward his mother and whispered, "She's watching." Nyasha looked at him. "Who?" "The woman beneath the tree." Nyasha's breath caught. "Ogwi?" He nodded slowly. "She came with him. With Mzikado. Just for a moment. Then she left again. I think she listens when we call their names." Nyasha turned her face toward the hills, where the great trees swayed gently. She closed her eyes and felt the wind stroke her cheek like a mother's touch. Perhaps it was true. Perhaps the dead did not just sleep, they lingered, waiting for their names to be spoken again. For memory to make them whole. Perhaps that was all Ogwi ever wanted, not vengeance. Not to steal a child, but simply to be remembered. To have her sorrow seen. To have her name carried by the wind. That night, Nyasha placed a single candle before the small altar in her home. Around it, she laid 3 things, a strand of beads from her grandfather, the red scarf her son once wore, and a carved wooden flute long cracked by time. She lit the candle and whispered. "Ogwi. Mzijuma. Mzikado. Ancestors of Mugoma. May your names never vanish. May the wind carry you always. May the living speak you into tomorrow." The flame flickered once, then steadied. In the years that followed, others came to her for guidance. Not because she claimed power, but because she never denied the truth. She told them stories, not to dazzle, but to remind. She said, "The world is more than what we see. It breathes through dreams and speaks through trees. Listen well." Children born after Tendo's return began calling her Mama Wavyama, Mother of Whispers. They believed she could talk to wind and command the roots. She never encouraged this. Instead, she taught them to listen, to wait, to honor the old ways. "The spirits are not here to serve you," she would say. "They are here to remind you of who you are." And when she grew old, and her hair turned silver like starlight, she still walked barefoot each morning to the edge of the cassava fields. She would stand there, looking toward the hills, as if expecting someone. She said little in her final years. But she always kept the red scarf near, folded and pressed between the pages of her old prayer book. One morning, as the first rain of the new season fell, she passed away in her sleep. Peacefully. Without fear. The village mourned. The drums were silent for 3 days. Children left wooden carvings beneath the weeping tree. Women tied red cloth to the doorposts. Men gathered beneath the baobab and spoke her name again and again. Tendo, now a grown man, led her burial rites. He wore white, as she once had, and spoke not just as a son, but as one who had seen the spaces between worlds. He poured water onto the earth and said. She walked into the silence and returned. She spoke with spirits and listened to sorrow. She brought light where there was none. Let her name be carried by the wind. Then, as if the forest itself heard and approved, a wind rose from the north and blew across the village, soft and low. Leaves swirled. Fires flickered. And someone, no one ever said who, began to hum the lullaby of the weeping tree. It was not loud. But it was enough. Nyasha's name was not written in books. It was not carved into stone. But the children of Mugoma still tell her story. Of the night the forest wept. Of the child who returned. Of the mother who walked with spirits and came back whole. And when the harmattan wind returns each year, blowing dust across the cassava fields and whispering through the hills, the people of Mugoma pause. They close their eyes. And they remember.